Just before our break, I was discussing certain rhetorical trope. And if you look on the screen, you'll see that there is an allusion to consumptive Romeos and Juliet's diphtherial. That's on page 39 in your book under Family Album. Then there was another reference in a poem called The Suicide's Room on page 122. Szymborska wrote, "And one fly buzzed, that is, was still alive," and that was a fly in the room of a suicide. Now, the first is a reference to Shakespeare, to Romeo and Juliet, of course. The second is an allusion to Emily Dickinson's poem, "I Heard a Fly Buzz When I Died." So poets will use other poets as a fulcrum for the advancement of their argument. And let's see how that works. Here is the Romeo and Juliet reference. Consumptive Romeos and Juliet's diphtherial. Now, if you notice, the first is an adjective consumptive, and the word Romeo is a noun. Then it's reversed, where you have the noun Juliet's and the adjective diphtherial. On the one hand, this can be called antimetaboly, inverting the order of repeated words. Now, antimetaboly actually means words themselves, as explicit words, are reversed. But this is an anti-metabolic process that you see here, where you have an interesting reversal. Now, remember, this is ironic. Our families don't have people who die in love. They die from diseases, men and women. But you can also look at consumptive Romeos and Juliet's diphtherial another way. You can look at it as chiasmus, the order of the first phrase reversed in the second. You have adjective noun, then noun adjective, and this would be a reversed phrase. You can also look at this a third way according to rhetorical trope, and that is by contrarium, one of two opposite statements used to prove the other. The opposite statements are, this is not a romantic Romeo or a Juliet desperate. This is a consumptive Romeo and a Juliet diphtherial dying of diseases, human diseases, medical diseases, not at all of love. Whenever you have phrases that are exactly proportional, they are called isocolons. And here you have an isocolon, adjective noun, noun adjective, the repetition of phrases of equal length and usually corresponding structure. So this one short phrase by Szymborska can be evaluated 4 different ways rhetorically, and then a fifth. This can be called an oxymoron, which is a condensed paragraph, a condensed paradox. The paradox, of course, is that no lovers in our family, at least no people die in the way Shakespeare has them die. They die of normal lives, normal diseases, terrible diseases, diseases that are debilitating and enervating, but diseases that illustrate and encapsulate the human condition. Now, when you realize that Szymborska is a poet, she uses language intended to wrench out of common usage ideas that would be expressed in prose in very conventional ways. Rhetorical techniques are utilized in order to find new expression for poets of old ideas. So let's look at some other trope, or some other tropes that Szymborska uses. One is the anaphora. Anaphora is the repetition of one or more words at the beginning of consecutive sentences. And if you turn to page 20, a poem called An Unexpected Meeting, you'll read, "Our tigers drink milk. Our hawks tread the ground. Our sharks have all drowned. Our wolves yawn beyond the open cage. Our snakes have shed their lightning. Our apes their flights of fancy. Our peacocks have renounced their plumes." Of course, what she's saying is that the animals that we've known them as we've known them in the world have been killed off or have died off. And that's why the hawks tread the ground, and that's why the sharks have all drowned. Sharks don't drown. Sharks are continuously in motion. But the use of the word "our" at the beginning becomes ironic. Ours, ours, ours. We have destroyed them. We have hunted them down. We have removed their predatory grounds. We have destroyed their habitation. We have fragmented their lives. We have done this, and if they are ours, they are our dead. And consequently, the anaphora becomes a very, very effective technique for demonstrating the culpability of human beings. Here is another one, a figuration. A figuration is an elaborate description, and this comes in a poem called Rubens' Women in page 22 of your text, where we describe the figures of Rubens as he has painted them. "For even the sky bulges here with pudgy angels, and the chubby god, thick-whiskered Phoebus, on a sweaty steed riding straight into the seething bedchamber." And this lascivious scene, this luscious scene, this scene of buxom and pulchritude and sweatiness becomes a figuration in the hands of Szymborska, who de-romanticizes what Rubens gives us. Irony. There's a poem on page 145 called Hitler's First Photograph. Now, you can't get more ironic. Irony is a poem, is a type of writing that causes you to be suspicious when you read it. Something's wrong about the poem when you're reading it. And therefore, you've got to determine that the writer means to say something other than what she is saying. Then you have to determine what she's trying to say, and you attempt to reconstruct it. Hitler's First Photograph. And what is ironic is, here is a little boy, 1 year old, being photographed by his mom and his father. A figure whose tummy is full of milk. We just don't know what he's going to be like when he grows up. Is he going to be a printer, a doctor, a merchant, a priest? And these are Hitler's parents and the photographer looking at him and saying, how's he going to grow up? What's he going to be like? I want to look at this poem on page 145. And take a few moments to see this ultimate irony that is being given to us by Szymborska. Turn to page 145. Now, imagine the photographer has the camera out and is about to shoot a picture of this little boy. Little 1-year-old, chubby little youngster, laughing and moving about and making it somewhat difficult for the photographer to focus and to shoot. And everyone's admiring this little baby because everyone admires their baby. Everyone admires his baby. Let's see what it says. And who's this little fellow in his itty-bitty robe? That's tiny baby Adolf, the Hitler's little boy. Now remember, Szymborska was invaded by Hitler. Will he grow up to be an LLD or a tenor in Vienna's opera house? Whose teensy hand is this? Whose little ear and eye and nose? Cute little kid. Whose tummy full of milk? We just don't know. Printers, doctors, merchants, priests. Where will those tootsie-wootsies finally wander? To a garden? To a school? To an office? To a bride? Maybe to the burgomaster's daughter. The mother has a vision. She had a dream, and in that dream, a dove flew. Well, that's a good sign. Notice the irony of the poem gets even thicker. A dove seen in a dream means joyful news. If it's caught, a long-awaited guest will come. And then they begin looking at this little kid in the diaper, this cute little youngster who's being photographed at 1 year old. A little pacifier, a diaper, a rattle, a bib, our bouncing boy, thank God and knock on wood, is well. The irony, of course, when you reconstruct the poem is this is one child who should have died at childbirth. That's the irony of this poem. Shh! Let's not start crying, sugar. The baby starts crying. Hitler. The camera will click for you under its black hood. And then the poem shifts. It shifts to a teacher who's bored with history. And he's grading papers. And Szymborska ends the poem by saying this. The Klinger Atelier, Grabenstrasse, Bronnen, and Bronnen is a small but worthy town. Honest businesses, that's who we have in this town. Honest businesses, obliging neighbors, the smell of yeast dough, there are bakeries, and of gray soap. But that laundry soap in future years will be the boiled flesh of Hitler's enemies. No one hears howling dogs or fate's footsteps. A history teacher loosens his collar and yawns over homework. Well, that history teacher, 40 years from now, is not going to be yawning. He's going to be living in terror. And the history that he writes will be the history of terror. So when we look at rhetorical tropes, go back to the screen here, we see that irony is one of Szymborska's finest moments. There's another poem that's ironical called The Suicide's Room. A man commits suicide. You know the story. Well, he seemed so nice. He seemed so happy. He seemed such a carefree fellow. All his friends knew that, would never have thought that a person like this would commit suicide. Turn to page 123 for the full impact. The Suicide's Room. This, of course, is the poem. This is the poem that reads, one fly buzzed that was still alive. There's a fly still in that room, alive. The suicide is dead. And the poem ends with this ironic statement. And he had so many friends. But all of us fit neatly inside the empty envelope propped up against the cup where he wrote why he committed suicide. All of us don't mean anything now to this fellow. I have a problem with suicides. They don't realize how much hope and how much hope they've deceived, and they don't realize how many people they've hurt. Metaphors. Metaphors, of course, are interesting, ironic tropes. There's a poem called The Boat. The Boat. And it begins this way. So this is his mother, this small woman, the gray-eyed procreator. And Szymborska calls the mother a boat. She is the boat in which years ago he sailed to shore. She is the boat from which he stepped into the world, into uneternity. Eternity means forever. But when you're born into death. And so you're born into uneternity. And thus Szymborska creates another trope, the word uneternity. And that is identified by Lanham as prosthesis. Adding a letter or syllable to the beginning of a word is uneternity. Let's look at another. Mimesis is the imitation of actions or utterances. And here, in a poem called Coloratura, which we may hear about more later, we have her imitating the voice of a bassoon, a woodwind instrument. Look at this mimesis. But hark, it's dark. Oh, doom, too soon. She's threatened by the black bassoon. And you get the sense of this rhythm, this sound, this sonority. Hark, it's dark, oh, doom, too soon. She's threatened by the black bassoon. Topographia, when you describe surfaces, when you describe nature, you have topographia. Now this is a little bit more imaginative than most topographia. But in the poem, Notes from a Non-Existent Himalayan Expedition, we have Szymborska saying, so these are the Himalayas, mountains racing to the moon. What a fantastic image. We can see the Great Wall of China from the moon. Apparently it's one of the few sites that man-made objects that can be seen from the moon. But the Himalayas, of course, can be seen. Nature has created grandeur and sublimity. And this becomes a description we can identify as topographia. There are many other tropes that one can identify. Lanham has some 336 different tropes. But we're going to stop at this point and have Miss Lisa Scannell, who's going to describe poems from Could Have. And she'll have about 15 minutes in which to address these poems and to give you some idea of her interpretation of the works of Szymborska. Good.
I'm doing the works Could Have, which she wrote in 1972. This grouping of poetry seems to all focus on human existence and why human beings were placed on the face of this planet, or whether or not we have the right to choose free will, or if we are products of fate and destiny, if we have an afterlife, all of the issues that perhaps not everyone thinks of in a lifetime, but issues that are very important to a majority of people in a lifetime. First, I wanted to start with the poem Could Have. I thought this poem discusses a lot, or portrays a lot, about fate and destiny in terms of how certain events occur in a person's life. It could have happened. It could have happened. It had to happen. It had happened earlier, later, nearer, further off. It happened, but not to you. You were saved because you were the first. You were saved because you were the last, alone with others, on the right, the left, because it was raining, because of the shade, because the day was sunny. The beginning of this poem discusses nothing other than the fact that if you're in the right place at the right time, something's going to happen to you, or if you're not, you're going to avoid whatever circumstance you could have been in. It's almost as if it's like a domino theory. The way if one event occurs, then another event will occur. If it's nothing that you actually have the ability to pick and choose in terms of free will. Then she goes on to mention, you were in luck. There was a forest. You were in luck. There were no trees. You were in luck. A rake, a hook, a beam, a break, a jam, a turn, a quarter inch, an instant. You were in luck. Just then a straw went floating by. Luck is an issue here, which also brings to mind the whole idea of fate and destiny, predetermined life, the fact that when you're born, your life is already determined. You have absolutely no say-so in doing so. Every road that you choose has already been picked for you. And perhaps this is true. We discuss God and say that he's able to see all time, past, present, and future simultaneously. If that's the case, then was everything already chosen for you before you were actually even, before your soul was even brought to life? Then she turns and says, as a result, because, although, despite, what would have happened if a hand, a foot, within an inch, a hair's breadth, from an unfortunate coincidence. So you're here, still dizzy from another dodge, close shave, reprieve, one hole in the net, and you slipped through. I couldn't be more shocked or speechless. Listen how your heart pounds inside me. I mean, everything that happens in this poem is by chance. It's either by chance or it's by something that's already been determined. If you take a certain path, your life will turn out a certain way. It's something that goes hand in hand. Everything is a domino effect in that poem. The overall idea of all the poems that I saw was almost as if a child was developing in terms of understanding the reasons why people were created or human beings were chosen to exist. The theater impressions, which is the next poem on page 67, also brings to mind some interesting ideas in terms of why people were created. I mean, were we created in order to learn God's lessons and die and face God and explain all of the things that we learned? Or are we living in a theater? Are we like the puppets of some higher power? Are we the ones that that do all of the everyday duties that we do and all of the tasks that we do, thinking that we're going somewhere past this, but in all actuality, every day is just every day, and it goes nowhere beyond this. The beginning of this poem I thought was interesting. For me, the tragedy's most important act is the sixth, the raising of the dead from the stage's battlegrounds, the straightening of wigs and fancy gowns, removing knives from stricken breasts, taking nooses from lifeless necks, lining up among the lives to face the audience. It's almost as if she's questioning whether or not there is life after death, or if there's nothing after death. It's almost a play on anything that anyone actually believes in. We would all hope that there would be something after we die, that there would be someone that we would have to face, and that there would actually be a maker who would praise us for all of the things that we've learned and lessons that we have demonstrated our understanding for. It's like, is our whole life a play, and then you wake up and at the end you bow and that's your curtain and that's the end of everything that you've done? Or do you spend 80 years here in order to do something beyond that? The end of this poem, which is on page 68, also kind of restates the same idea, but the curtains fall and is the most uplifting part. The things you see before it hits the floor. Here on one hand quickly reaches for a flower, there another hand picks up a fallen sword. Only then one last unseen hand does its duty and grabs me by the throat. Her poems in this section are almost tragic in certain ways because of the fact that she is through her writing and through her poetry, coming to realizations that a lot of people don't come to in an entire lifetime. The next poem that I thought was actually very interesting was The Birthday, which is on page 79. And we think of birthdays as a celebration for the day that we were born, and in all actuality, it's kind of, on your birthday, if you think about all the birthdays that have passed, you would think about all the things that you've done in your life or all the things that you haven't experienced in your life that you wish you would have or could have or should have. And this poem almost makes light of all of the things that we find important one day and don't find important another day. It starts off, so much of the world at once, how it rustles and bustles, moraines and morays and molasses and mussels, the flame, the flamingo, the flounder, the feather, how to line them all up, how to put them together, all the thickets and crickets and creepers and creeks. The beaches and leeches alone could take weeks. The poem continues and continues to give different examples of different things that we found important at one time and perhaps really aren't important. Looking at them on paper, it's not quite as important as one would have thought it to be during that particular time. A little further into the poem, I'm just passing through, it's a 5-minute stop. I won't catch what is distant, what's too close, I'll mix up. While trying to plumb what the void's inner sense is, I'm bound to pass by all these poppies and pansies. Those 3 lines right there tend to sum up everything that life is about. All of the things that are distant, you won't even pay attention to because they're too far away to even notice. And all the things that are too close, you may analyze too much to even understand what they're actually about. You'll pass all of the things in life that you may find important, but perhaps they're not important. Perhaps they're simply flowers in a field. Perhaps they're simply things that you were supposed to learn and continue on about your life and move on. The next line, what a loss when you think how much effort was spent perfecting this petal, this pistol, this scent. Everything about that is 100% true in terms of how people live their lives. All of the things that you spend hours, minutes, days, years perfecting and trying to analyze and understand with the best of your ability, at the end may not mean much. Every birthday that passes, there's something that you take into consideration that perhaps really wasn't as important as you thought in the overall scheme of life. That's one of the things that I think is extremely important about all of these poems is her intellectual ability to stimulate someone's thoughts in terms of how important life is and how important all of the individual things that we take into account are on a day-to-day basis. It's hard to sit back in this society and think about what's really important. Is getting up at 8 o'clock in the morning and going to work and being on time that particular day really important in the overall scheme of things? Or is learning all of the lessons in life you can possibly learn that make you teach other people or make you help other people, are those the important issues in life? And our society has made it extremely easy for people to overlook all of the things that make us human, or that make us sit back and actually have to face our inner thoughts and our inner beliefs and choose what we believe and be able to discuss that and share that with other human beings. The next poem is on the next page. It's page 80. Allegro ma non troppo. This poem I thought was interesting because she actually feels the ability to thank life for being alive. But it's almost, towards the end, it's almost as if she actually fears life or a part of life. It's like a child is actually developing and learning that their mortality actually exists, and all of the questions are becoming not necessarily answers, but they're becoming something that you absolutely have to become comfortable with. The beginning of the poem starts, life. You're beautiful, I say. You just couldn't get more fecund, before, more befrogged or nightingale, more anthillful or sprouts spouting. I'm trying to court life's favor, to get into its good graces, to anticipate its whims. I'm always the first to bow. It's as if she's sitting back and actually taking life into consideration and wondering what it is about life that you're supposed to learn and what it is about life that you're supposed to take in and use to the best of your ability to live your life. Always there where it can see me, with my humble, reverent face. She uses the word humble as if a human being needs to be humble to life because it's such a larger creation. It's something so much more than we can actually conceive of or understand. Soaring on the wings of rapture, falling under waves of wonder. If someone were to sit back and actually take into account all the things that pass us by on a day-to-day basis that we ignore or that we think nothing of, you would probably sit in amazement or wonderment for days at the fact that all of these things are creations by someone or by something, some higher power, and all of these things are things that we take for granted because we see them on a day-to-day basis. Oh, how grassy is the hopper, how this berry ripely rasps. I would never have conceived it if I weren't conceived myself. This is an appreciation to all the things that have actually been created by God or life. All of the things that we don't appreciate on a day-to-day basis, we should appreciate because those are the things that are responsible for our existence. Whatever created that created us. Life, I say, I have no idea what I could compare you to. We have no concept of what life is not like because life is what we live. This poem to me is filled with profound thoughts. It's filled with someone who actually sat down and considered all of the important things about life and all the questions about life that one could possibly ask in a lifetime and try to get the answers to, even though there are no actual answers. They're only concepts, they're only ideas. And a person has to have an incredible amount of self-confidence in what they believe and what they do in order to be able to publish their thoughts and their feelings. This is so open for criticism. Anyone could criticize this. Anyone could say this is stupid or that this has no meaning or there's no consequence to any of the things that she believes. I praise your inventiveness, bounty, sweep, exactitude, sense of order, gifts that border on witchcraft and wizardry. The entire existence of life is, in our minds, witchcraft or wizardry. It's not, we can't create it, we have no control over it other than the destruction of ourselves or other creatures. We don't have any powers to create life or to start it or to start a new species or a new group of animals. The next grouping of phrases is also very interesting. I just don't want to upset you, tease or anger, vex or rile. For millennium, I've been trying to appease you with my smile. There's a fear of what life actually is. The unknown is always scary, no matter what it is. If we don't know what exists, it's always difficult to assume that whatever it is nice and pleasant because there could be a dark side to everything that we know. And I thought this poem, more so than any other in this grouping, showed the development of her beliefs in terms of life and how important it is to appreciate the existence of everything that nature has created. And that's kind of all.
That was Miss Leslie Scannell, and yeah, she's giving you some good insight into her impressions of the poems. Indeed, a poet wants this kind of reading, a welcome reader, an intelligent reader, a reader who understands the subtleties of the poetry. And both Mr. Harrison and Miss Scannell this evening have given you these insights. I'd like to spend some time now detailing the Greases, that is, looking at what Szymborska has to say about government, about religion. I'd like to spend time now focusing on what Szymborska has to say about government and religion, about science, about economics, about social issues. And the first thing we're going to do is look at government. She has a poem called, her book in 1957 was Calling Out to Yeti. And on page 4, you have the text of a poem entitled Notes from a Non-Existent Himalayan Expedition. The poem says, essentially, there are a lot of things on earth that we ought to appreciate. And talking to the abominable snowman, the Yeti, who is in fact the Russian leader, Szymborska says, you better look and see what is on this earth whom you can respect and whom you ought to pay attention to, because you're ignoring reality. She starts out by saying, Yeti, down there we've got Wednesday, bread, and alphabets. 2 times 2 is 4, and then she gets a little silly. Roses are red there, and violets are blue. The leaders don't realize the everyday matters, the everyday events that sustain human life. She goes on to say, Yeti, crime is not all we're up to down there. Yeti, not every sentence there means death. Down on this earth there are some people who ought to be allowed to live, and there are some people who ought to be freed from the jails they're in. She says we've inherited hope, which is the gift of forgetting. That's an interesting oxymoron, interesting paradox. We've inherited hope, the gift of forgetting. You'll see how we give birth among ruins. Well, we've already looked at some poetry where she talks about how the history and the events of the past, nevertheless, people forget or people survive. And she goes on to say, Yeti, we've got Shakespeare there down on this earth. Yeti, we play solitaire and violin. At nightfall, we turn on lights, Yeti. So that the notes from a non-existent Himalayan expedition do have bearing on the government. Let's look at a poem on page 11 called Museum. Again, it's a way of looking at government, and Szymborska is talking about what one finds in a museum. She says, we're on page 11 of the text, here is a fan. Where is the maiden's blush? Here are swords. Where is the ire? Where is the anger? Where is the history? Where are the battles? Where is the fury? In other words, in war, you're going to have violence, hatred. You're going to have revenge. And again, her view on government is if you conduct wars, you will experience the actions that lay behind the swords in these museums. At line 14 of this poem, she says, the crown has outlasted the head. And indeed, you see the crown with the jewels in it, but it's not being worn by any human being. The wearers are dead, and all you have is this iron and this metal and this gold and these jewels left to give you a sense of the nation that the king had governed. Turn to page 12, A Moment in Troy. This again suggests the Trojan War, the story of the Iliad. And she draws an allusion to the types of people living today who may someday be young enchantresses who might in fact lead men to battle and cause battles for their beauty. Little girls, in the middle of dinner, in the middle of a book, while studying the mirror, may suddenly be taken off to Troy. In the grand boudoir of a wink, they all turn into beautiful Helens. So we're reminded in Szymborska's poetry about the Greek wars and about these events. In page 17, we have a poem called Vocabulary, where she talks about words and talks about new nations formulating themselves. Of course, she's conscious, unquestionably, of the post-colonial period. The nations being formed out of Africa, the nations being formed out of the Middle East, the nations that are entering the United Nations. And on page 17, we get our sense of these countries. L'Apollon, l'Apollon. Isn't it terribly cold there, she asked, and then sighed with relief. So many countries have been turning up lately that the safest thing to talk about is climate. Why talk about politics when the politics can be so difficult? I'm going to move this and go through this in a little bit more relaxed pace at this point. Look at the poem entitled Travel Elegy on page 18. Here we have tourists going through various countries, and we see statues, we see various figures, we see some statues that have their heads knocked off. Memories come to mind, like excavated statues. When you dig up these excavations and you find a torso without a head. Memories come to mind like excavated statues that have misplaced their heads in Samarkand, Paris, Leningrad, Uppsala, Sofia. And so what we have again is a sense of governments that come and go, that lead and collapse, that live and die. And this becomes, again, Szymborska's understanding of government. The poem Landscape on pages 36 to 37 also gives us a sense that is on page 37. In the old master's landscape, the trees have roots beneath the oil paint. And you have a picture of an image, you have a picture of a landscape. But what is the world in which this landscape is being drawn? The woman says, I know the world 6 miles around. I know the herbs and spells for every pain. God still looks down on the crown of my head. I still pray I won't die suddenly. And then, war is punishment, and peace is a reward. War is punishment, and peace is a reward. That, of course, is a concept of providential history, that your nation is going to go to war, and you're going to be punished because you violate God's laws. The prophets of ancient Israel spoke about the way the nation would be punished for their sins, and how nations around them would be punished for leading war against Israel. Remember the book of the prophet Deborah as one example. War is punishment and peace is a reward. When you begin to think about our country today, one of the thrills, at least one of these statements politicians keep making, is that we are at peace. And the reward is a good economy. The reward is a job market. The reward is the possibility of building trade around the world. But the basic reward is peace. Again, governments thrive in peace. And her attitude of the paradox establishes the idea that governments that go to war are punishing themselves and punishing their citizens if they are the ones who conduct the wars or lead the wars or want the wars. Turn to page 40 to 41, the poem called The Railroad Station. My non-arrival in the city of N took place on the dot. You'd be alerted in my unmailed letter. The train pulled up at platform 3. People wait, out-of-town guests. But the railroad station, the mail carriers, these are all examples of people who serve the government. Turn to page 45, the soliloquy for Cassandra. Who is Cassandra? Cassandra was the prophetess of Troy who warned the Trojans that they were going to lose if they admitted this horse into the gates of Troy. But remember, Cassandra was a prophetess, and because she would make love to the God who had given her the gift of prophecy, he invested her with the terrible reality that while she would prophesy the truth, no one would believe her. And so here we have another government being discussed here, the government of Troy. And Cassandra says, "My prophetic words burn like fire in the sky. Only unacknowledged prophets are privy to such prospects. Only those who got off on the wrong foot, whose predictions turn to fact so quickly, it's as if they'd never lived." In the book No End of Fun, we have a discussion of past emperors, past empires, a Byzantine mosaic on page 47, where she talks about these governments that live and die, that grow and are forfeit. The Byzantine mosaic, if you look on 47, has the king and queen speaking to each other, the emperor and the empress. "O Theotropia, my empress consort. O Theodendron, my consort emperor. How fair thou art, my hollow-cheeked beloved. How fair art thou, blue-lipped spouse. Thou art so wondrous frail beneath thy bell-like gown, the alarm of which, if but removed, would waken all my kingdom. This act of love may result in problems of power. How excellently mortified thou art, my lord and master, to my own shadow, a twinned shade." And then this love scene begins to develop into the horror and the end of the poem. "I am thy twin in horror," lead on Theotropia, as power and as prowess and as leadership leads to an unwarranted and fruitless cause. Look at the poem Beheading on page 50. The reference is to Mary, Queen of Scots, who went to the scaffold and was beheaded. Again, Szymborska is giving us history. Who is right and who is wrong? We realize that the Queen of Scots, Mary Stuart, is going to be beheaded. She's going to ascend the scaffold. And Queen Elizabeth at the throne is going to watch the scene. Queen Elizabeth and Mary, Queen of Scots, each of them in a different situation, one about to die, one living to rule, think in unison. Lord, have mercy on me, says Mary, Queen of Scots. Right is on my side, says Queen Elizabeth. Living means getting in the way, says Mary, Queen of Scots. Under certain circumstances, the owl is the baker's daughter. The phrasing, the license, the rationale, all of which becomes the right of the ruler to prevail. This will never end. It is already over. What am I doing here? There's nothing here. Death means there's nothing here, and the queen, having the power to destroy others, may also finally have nothing. Turn to the Pieta on page 51, where a figure hears someone being shot at the prison wall. Yes, she loved him very much. Yes, he was born that way. Yes, she was standing by the prison wall that morning. Yes, she heard the shots. We're not sure. We can interpret who was shot and what prison wall one was standing by. And what figure born to a mother, pure and decent, was sacrificed to the mob or to the government or to the kingdom because of his piety, his righteousness, or his disagreement with the powers that be. Turn to Voices on page 69, where again you get some idea of the nature of government. Who are the voices that are talking about classical rule, classical power, Grecian hegemony, Roman rule? Who are these voices? You have Tarquinians where you'd least expect them, Etruscans on all sides. Where are they today? If that weren't enough, you have Volsinians and Vientians. The Olertians beyond all reason. And of course the endlessly vexatious Sapinians, my dear Sextus Oppius. Here they are plotting the destruction of these peoples, their enemies. And this becomes the history of government that Szymborska has experienced in Poland under the Nazis, in Poland under the Russians. Who knows what the future will bear in a society, in a world that presumably had cleansed itself of all these worries. She says in the poem Voices, little nations do have little minds. The circle of thick skulls expands around us. Reprehensible customs. Backward laws. That's what's wrong with these people. They have ineffectual gods, my dear Titus Villius. Let's get rid of them. These are the voices of power. These are the voices of government that Szymborska wishes to show. And in the poem Could Have in Praise of Dreams, on pages 87 to 88 of your text, we have someone who just doesn't want to be involved anymore in the histories of wars and the governments who have destroyed others and themselves. I can't complain. I've been able to locate Atlantis. I've accomplished something. I know the fruits of history. As soon as war breaks out, I roll over on my side. I'm going to go back to sleep. I don't want any part of it. Psalm, page 99. She writes her own psalm. And starts out by talking about the fact that all states, all nations are formed by artificial boundaries determined by treaty or determined by war. And the truth of the matter is that the clouds float above them and are indifferent to state borders, and the rains are indifferent to state borders. Sandstorms are indifferent to state borders. Nature itself looks with disdain upon man's efforts to circumscribe his culture, his languages, his people. And so Szymborska writes this psalm. I suppose it could fit into the traditional Hebraic psalms. Oh, the leaky boundaries of man-made states. How many clouds float past them with impunity? How much desert sand shifts from one land to another? How many mountain pebbles tumble onto foreign soil in provocative hopes? He says on page 99, need I mention every single bird that flies in the face of frontiers? Or are lights on the roadblock at the border? They don't know where the borders are. They don't know that they're flying over nations. A humble robin, still its tail resides abroad, while its beak stays home. It's sitting on a rail between borders. Its tail resides abroad. Its beak stays home. If that weren't enough, it won't stop bobbing. And then this very ironic, this very funny statement, where an ant is crawling on a border guard's boots. Among innumerable insects, I'll single out only the ant between the border guard's left and right boots, blithely ignoring the questions, where from and where to. The border guard is asking people, where are they coming from and where are they going, and they'll take their passports. The ants don't ask the question, where are they going? These borders are artificial, and they are political, and sometimes they are confining, and sometimes they are liberating. Well, Szymborska keeps giving us insight into government, and it's almost anarchistic as she attacks these governments. Look what she says in the final words of the psalm. And who but the octopus, with impudent long arms, would disrupt the sacred bounds of territorial waters? Does the octopus know whether he's going into Vietnamese waters, Chinese waters, Japanese waters, Baltic waters. She's being very cynical and very ironic. And then she becomes very ironic of statesmen who go to meetings, whom she probably sees in the movies, in newsreels, or on television. They're always smiling, even while they're carrying out actions that might destroy whole peoples. And people want to see their leaders smile. They don't want to see them worried. The world would rather see hope than just hear its song. And that's why statesmen have to smile. Their pearly whites mean they're still full of cheer. The game's complex. The goal's far out of reach. The outcome's still unclear. They should be frowning. They should be gnashing their teeth. They should be worried. They should be seeking alliances. They should be seeking ways to extricate themselves from alliances. But you'll never see that from these leaders on TV or in the movies. Once in a while, we need a friendly, gleaming set of teeth. Then there's a poem called The Terrorist on page 9. Page 108. A terrorist has planted a bomb. He's waiting for it to go off. The poem takes its time, waiting to tick off the moments of that clock. And she tells us, the terrorist, he's watching, the name of the poem. The bomb in the bar will explode at 13:20. Now it's just 13:16. There's still time for some to go on in and some to come out. The terrorist has already crossed the street. The distance keeps him out of danger. And what of you? Just like the movies. A woman in a yellow jacket, she's going in. A man in dark glasses, he's coming out. Teenagers in jeans, they're talking. Back to the time. What made that Gary Cooper so great, High Noon, was that they shot the movie without the clocks. And it didn't seem to go quite well enough. And so they reshot scenes showing the clock hand moving, waiting for the arrival of the vengeful prisoners. And that made the movie, that gave the movie tension. And here is Szymborska giving this poem tension by telling us the seconds as they're ticking off. "13, 17, and 40 seconds. 13, 17, it's 1:17 in the afternoon. And then she goes down to 13:20 exactly, the last paragraph. It's now 13:20 exactly. This waiting, it's taking forever. The terrorists can't wait for the bomb to go off. Any second now. No, not yet. Yes, now! The bomb! It explodes. The tension she has caught. And one understands that government and fascist activity and anti-governmental activity and pro-governmental activity are at risk and we discover this truth in a poem with all the tension of the action itself. And that's what I think a poet is trying to demonstrate, the action itself. She gives us on page 161 and 162 a poem called A Tale Begun. The world is never ready for the birth of a child, especially if that child's going to cause trouble, if that child's going to lead a nation into war, if that child's going to brutalize others. And she begins then to recount the birth of a child. We don't know what to expect. Thor, King Harold the Butterpot, Minister Fouché, Ming, the trustworthy in Nineveh, the Prince Cardinal, Beria, that terror of the NKVD in Russia, Karol the Hammer, Cheops, the Doge, the Kwabe tribe. All these stories she has dredged up from the past, indicating the terror of government. But government depends not just on human beings, all kinds of events celebrate government. And in the poem Children of Our Age, she says, whatever you say reverberates, whatever you don't say speaks for itself. So either way you're talking politics, even if you don't want to become involved in government. Even if you don't want to be involved in government, you must. To acquire a political meaning, you don't have to be human. Raw material will do, or protein feed, or crude oil. I'd like to conclude now with a few statements that Szymborska has to say about religion, and try then to give us some sense. She herself claims that she is an atheist, or at least she has not given claim to any religion. To some extent, like Thomas Brown, she says religions have been a greater cause for war than any other concept. This is Thomas Brown in the 17th century. She reminds us of the Tower of Babel. Didn't you hear the storm? The north wind shook the walls. The tower gate, like a lion's maw, yawned on its creaking hinges. In the poem called Water on page 28, she talks about the different kinds of vessels that we use to celebrate the sacraments. You've been in christening fonts and courtesans' baths. Well, christening font, of course, is holy. A courtesan's bath is not. But you're in a christening font at birth. At death, you're in a coffin. And so you go from birth to death. You go from courtesans' baths to kisses. Religion and love, religion and the acts that are forbidden go hand in hand. These are forbidden acts to be in a courtesan's bath, to give hidden kisses. And so this is a cynical approach to religion. The fact that people can worship and yet find themselves unholy. Conversation with a stone. Go away, says the stone. I'm shut tight. Even if you break me to pieces, we'll all still be closed. You can grind us to sand. We still won't let you in. Is that the gravestone? Is that the grave? Is that a catafalque. I don't have much time. My mortality should touch you. I've got to move in. Is this Moses who wanted to break the stone? To have water gush out of it for the Israelites and wasn't allowed to do it? Landscape 36. God still looks down on the crown of my head. I still pray I won't die suddenly. God does look upon you, religionists say, but does he determine everyone's fate? Again on religion in this poem, Landscape. War is punishment and peace is a reward. Shameful dreams all come from Satan. Is that true? Or do they come from human beings themselves, using Satan as an excuse? Here's returning birds. This is not a dirge. It's only indignation. What makes her mad? It's an angel made of earthbound protean, a living kite with glands straight from the Song of Songs, singular in hand, a singular in air, without numbers in the hand, its tissues tied into a common knot of place and time, as in Aristotelian drama, unfolding to the wings applause, falls down and lies beside a stone, which in its own archaic symbol way sees life as a chain of failed attempts. The angel we think is an angel is really a human being trying to find religious potential, frustrated by the tragedies Aristotle describes in the Poetics, and living a life of failed attempts. Where is our religious hope under these circumstances? We know that God has no face, according to the Hebrew Scriptures. No one sees the face of God. Melville makes this statement about the Leviathan in Moby Dick. He says, the Leviathan turns its face away and all you see are its mighty body and its mighty actions. And here we see that the great mother has no face. The face cannot stay faithful to the body. The face disturbs the body. It is undivine. Those who try to be God and those who show their faces and try to show their power lose their divinity. What is salvation? Is it really God giving us hope, futurity, and eternity? Or is it just happenstance and fate? And this is a very cynical statement here. You were saved because you were the first. You were saved because you were the last. Alone, with others, on the right, the left. Because it was raining, because of the shade. Because the day was sunny. Find any excuse you want to explain why you were saved. And it's your thoughts. It's your rationale. Not God's. In the poem, The Letters of the Dead, we have a very puzzling statement. What are the dead dealing with? What have they invented? What's happened to them? What have they contributed to the world? Who is sponsoring their demise, their bad taste, Napoleon, steam, electricity, they're fatal remedies for curable diseases. They're fatal remedies for the curable diseases. They're foolish apocalypse, according to St. John. They're counterfeit heaven on earth, according to Jean-Jacques. And finally, she says, and this is really quite cynical, I know how to handle misfortune, how to take bad news. I can minimize injustice, lighten up God's absence. God's absence. The silence we spoke about earlier now becomes God's silence in absence. That's Szymborska. Poland, Russia. What does she believe?